Hello again, everyone. We're back, and welcome once again to Debate Week here on Arkansas PBS. At this hour, the candidates for the United States Senate, and they are, in alphabetical order, the Republican nominee, the incumbent, Senator John Boozman, the Libertarian candidate, Mr. Kenneth Cates, and the Democratic nominee, Natalie James. The questions for the debate will be coming from Una Lee of 4029 News, Fort Smith and Fayetteville, Christina Munoz of Natural State Update and Arkansas PBS, and I'm Steve Barnes. The rules for the debate, as always, agreed to by the candidates prior to the debate. Each nominee will have 1 minute to respond to a question, and the candidates will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal if they choose. At the conclusion of questioning, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. The order of candidate appearance, questioning, all determined prior to the debate in a drawing that was overseen by the candidates themselves or their representatives. Our first question will come from Una Lee, and it goes to Mr. Cates.
All right, Mr. Cates, thanks so much for joining us today. Many Arkansas-based companies like Walmart and Tyson are expanding coverage for abortions out of state. Now, the Pentagon has announced that they will provide funds for troop-seeking abortions. What is your stance on abortion? Do you support this policy?
I do not, Ms. Lee. I am pro-life 100%.
Over to Ms. James.
That is a wonderful question. Right now, we're in a time where we have to trust women, trust our doctors, and trust those professionals to make the best interest for everyone. Abortion isn't just abortion. We have to use the term correctly. It is an evacuation of the uterus. So if I have a D&C and I have a failed miscarriage, and by failed means it does not fully come out, I could die, and my 2 children that are home won't have a mother. Who's thinking about those lives? Who's thinking about the domestic violence survivors? Are those put in domestic situations where the man tells them, I know that you're pregnant, you can't leave? Who's helping those women? Right now, abortion is an international human right. It's not just the state's right to tell us what to do with our bodies. It is up for us to make sure that we have the adequate health care that we need, because abortion is health care.
Ms. James, thank you. Mr. Boozman, 1 minute.
Thank you, Steve. I am pro-life, and as a result of that, I don't believe in abortion except for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I also don't believe in federal funding of abortion, so if the military is starting to do that, then I would be very much opposed to that. We have many taxpayers throughout the country that feel the same way that I do. They don't want their taxpayer dollars used for abortions. In regard to Walmart and private companies, I don't agree with them doing that, but they are private companies. They get to do what they want to.
Mr. Cates, you have 30 seconds if you choose.
No rebuttal, sir.
All right, Ms. James, to you, 30 seconds.
Federal funding and federal protections are needed in this time. We are not poised to take ourselves back 50 years. We're not poised to allow our military women, we're not poised to let our employees, our Walmart employees, have back alley abortions or inadequate health care and access to the actual health care that they need. So we need to make sure we're thinking about what's best for the citizens and not what's best for us in our internal compass, but think about what's best for the actual citizens here.
Another 30 seconds for Mr. Boozman.
Thank you, Steve. Arkansas is one of the most pro-life states in the country. Again, as I go around the state, visit with constituents, most of them do not want their taxpayers' dollars used for abortion. And for that reason, I would be very much opposed, will be opposed, and will fight the effort in Congress to allow taxpayer dollars to be used for military abortions.
Next question from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Mr. James, or Ms. James.
Ms. James. Yes, and thank you all for being here today. Very much appreciate it. So there's no doubt that agriculture is a huge industry here in the state of Arkansas. Wheat prices have gone up due to the conflict in Ukraine. Corn prices have gone up because of drought issues. What do you believe is the federal government's role with regards to subsidizing farmers and those that make a living farming here in the state of Arkansas. And Ms. Cates, we go to you first. Ms. James.
That's an excellent question. I do feel that our government should subsidize. Arkansas is one of those great states where we not only provide to just us, we provide to everyone across the nation and across the globe. Now, right now, we are in a global market, and we need to make sure that our farmers can remain competitive and can remain top of mind. We're #1 in rice exports, we're #3 or 5 in cotton, and also in broiler cattle. So we want to make sure that our actual agriculture and our life and our way of life is sustainable, and that our children can bring in agro-tech and can bring in new things to continue to grow us forward and mix a 21st century education with our actual agriculture now to continue to grow us and make sure that we remain #1 in everything.
We go now to Mr. Boozman.
Well, thank you for the question. This is such an important question. Agriculture is 25% of our state's economy, but when you get outside of any town of any size, it's not 25%, it's probably 85 or 90%. This, in 2023, in the next Congress, every 5 years we do a big farm bill. I'm the head Republican on agriculture. I hope to be the chair of the Agriculture Committee in the next Congress. But what we'll be doing then is working very hard to make sure that the safety nets are put in place so that the farmers will be able to go to the bank, get the money that they need to make those loans so that they can come back and produce the safest, cheapest food supply of any place in our nation. So this is something that we will be working on very hard together. Agriculture is not a partisan issue. It's not about Democrats and Republicans. It's about taking care of the farm community throughout rural America, which is so, so very important.
Mr. Cates, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question as well. Well, I don't agree with federal subsidies necessarily. If the state chooses to do that, that's on them. But one thing we could do is the federal government could deregulate the farming industry. The EPA puts a lot of restrictions on them, and that could help them out, grow more and do better and provide food for all of us. Thank you.
Ms. James.
We have regulations to better protect us. We have EPA regulations to protect our ground, our water, our air, and to make sure what's being put into our actual agriculture is helping everybody. I think the subsidies would be amazing as long as the subsidies were inclusive for everyone and all farmers, and they're not competitive subsidies or competitive grants, what we're seeing across the nation. All farmers need to have ready access and available to these subsidies, so again, we can remain competitive in a global market.
And back to Mr. Boozman.
Well, providing our farmers with the ability to have some stability, to make a business plan, to go to the bank, to borrow the money that they need is so, so very important. Because of inflation, because of the terrible energy policy that we have, much of agriculture, the fertilizer that they depend on, many of the input costs, what it costs to run the sprinklers, the tractors, etc. The input costs are tremendous right now, and because of that, agriculture is in pretty dire straits.
Mr. Cates, a half minute if you choose.
No, sir.
To Senator Boozman first. Rural Arkansas is becoming increasingly rural at a really significant arresting pace. And the implications are really profound for the delivery of basic services, education, crime prevention, environmental, etc. What should be the federal government's role in addressing these problems that they seem likely to mount for the Arkansas countryside?
Steve, they are going to mount. And the reason being is that if you look at Arkansas, I believe 52 of our 75 counties lost population. You start losing population, you lose those turnback dollars. You already don't have much to begin with, and you just dig yourself in deeper. And that's why we mentioned agriculture. That's the thing that is so, so very important. Again, 85–90% of the economy. But it's not just agriculture, it's rural schools, it's rural hospitals, protecting them. You lose your school, you lose your community. The same is true again of the rural hospitals. One of the things that we've worked on very, very hard, there's a lot of money in the system, again, in a very bipartisan way, is providing broadband. Making sure making sure that they're able to access that. We used to think in terms of the 3 R's, roads, railroads, and runways. If you're not wired, you're not going to grow.
Mr. Cates.
Yes, sir. They're leaving the state because there's no opportunity. We need to lower taxes, get businesses to come back in the state, create jobs. That's what will get people here. Thank you.
Ms. James.
All right, we're going to elaborate on that lowering taxes. We need to make sure we're lowering taxes for the actual citizens, so that way they can stay in state. In our rural areas, we are seeing a sharp decline in everybody leaving, but that's because the job opportunities aren't there, and those jobs have been removed. Now, we want to make sure that in rural areas, they're not having to share hospitals. Last time I checked, in multiple counties, they have to share one hospital. That's not a conducive living environment, or having to be Port Omeg, or having to drive 100 miles to have a baby, or having to drive 100 miles just in case you feel that something's wrong with your heart. They shouldn't have those types of crises to deal with on top of being in the rural area. So federally, I feel that if we can address some of those issues and help with the environment, help with what's going on in the rural area, we would do a lot better in keeping our actual citizens there and well taken care of, because right now, majority of the state is not taken care of, especially in the Delta, and it's unfortunate, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do more federally to better protect all citizens in Arkansas.
Oh, Mr. Boozman, another 30.
Well, we've got some real challenges throughout the state, throughout rural Arkansas. The average age of our farmers 60. 40% of the healthcare providers in Arkansas are over 60. Young people are getting married at a much later age. Because of that, they're having fewer children. So again, the population is not there to backfill. And so as a result, we need to work as a group, the state working with the federal government, working with our local governments. We need to make sure that schools aren't disallowed because they've gone 5 students too low and you lose your rural school.
30 seconds for Mr. Cate.
No rebuttal, sir.
Oh, Ms. James.
All right, so our schools are running low, and that's correct, and we should not be closing them, and we should not be allowing our states to raise the actual how many children, to go from 300 to 750 minimum requirement for schools. Also, people aren't getting married because, well, let's get back to our platform, living wages. If you don't have living wages to sustain your household, what incentivizes you to get married? If you know that you're not going to have a job in your hometown, what incentivizes you to stay there? We have to do multiple incentives to keep people in the rural area and make sure they have a living adequate wage so that they can stay in that area and be better protected and feel safe.
Another question now, from Ms. Lee, and it goes first to Ms. James.
Ms. James, we had talked about spending before in a separate interview, and when asked about programs or departments that we could cut from, you had mentioned the Department of Defense's budget in a previous interview. So what is your current view on the military spending? Do we need to increase or cut back?
Again, back to that, our military spending. Our military spending is extremely high, and we have a lot of things that we need to be taken care of. I do feel if we did cut some of the administrative roles and actually paid our E1 through E6 and made sure that the base of our actual soldiers are taken care of, because they are taken care of with the health care, we would have a better outcome. Reallocating those actual funds to our state, or having a federal office work with our state office, our governor, so that we can use part of that $1.6 billion that was sent in, and that's from the actual citizens of Arkansas, and it's also from federal allocations. Now we have where those federal allocations are sent in, and we have a senator who doesn't ask where and why are they not being used for the actual citizens, and that needs to change. And I know I would make sure that I ask, why are we not using those federal allocations to whatever or whoever the governor is, to make sure that all Arkansans are better protected and have the resources and the accessibility that they need and they deserve.
To Mr. Boozman for 1 minute, sir.
Well, we live in a very, very dangerous world. We have a shooting war in Europe, which is really hard to imagine. My dad was a waist gunner on B-17s. Hard for me to imagine. My children, my grandchildren, again, how can this be? But it has occurred. The United States is intervening and helping, providing materials. It's just an example of the different hotspots throughout the world. We have Iran. We have China flexing their muscles, looking at Taiwan. We're helping Israel, protecting them in the Middle East. So there's so many things going on. The last thing that we need to do is cut defense. If anything, I would be an advocate, certainly with inflation. We need to make sure that we have the defense that we need. for sure.
To Mr. Cates.
Yes, sir. The first thing I would cut in defense spending is money that goes to woke agendas. Our soldiers need to do one thing and one thing only, and that's defend America and win battles. That's how they defend America. Another thing would be, right now, defense contractors, lobbyists, they're setting the stage for when we go to war and not, or when we go to war or not the legislative branch, and that needs to change. Thank you.
Ms. James.
When we talk about war, we're talking about making sure our job in the United States is, and our job in the Senate is to balance those alliances and manage those and de-escalate those crises. So what we're seeing in Ukraine, it's where we're doing de-escalation because God forbid, we don't want a World War III. And in order to do that, we have to make sure we have provisions available. So that does mean reallocating from our actual military to send over to aid to those who need it so that they can have the provisions so we don't have to use our military in order to provide services to a foreign country. I want to make sure that we understand it's important that we have federal candidates that are going to manage and de-escalate and appropriately use the funds appropriately for all Arkansans.
Have to call time.
Yes.
Mr. Boozman, another 30 seconds.
Well, we spend a lot of money, we waste a lot of money on things that the federal government has no business doing. The defense of our nation, though, I can't do that as an individual. The state of Arkansas, Senator Hutchison, our legislature can't do that. We depend on the federal government. So this is one of those things where it's not a question of how much, it's a question of what's needed, and then we need to provide the funding, whatever it takes, to keep our soldiers safe and to keep us safe.
Mr. Cates.
Yes, sir. If we look back at the war in Afghanistan, the U.S. government admits that $69 billion was wasted of the $2.3 trillion. So I want to ask everybody, these billions that we're sending to Ukraine, how much of that is getting wasted? I want freedom for the people of Ukraine. I pray for their peace, but we have to look at how much of that is not going to what it says that the people are saying it's going to. Again, $69 billion in Afghanistan lost of the $2.3 trillion.
To Ms. Munoz, and a question first for Mr. Boozman.
Yes, and this is actually a question that came from one of our viewers. President Biden has pardoned Americans who served federal time for simple marijuana possession. Do you agree? And of course, why or why not? And Senator Boozman, we go first to you.
No, thank you for the question. And President Biden has pardoned those that are in federal penitentiary for simple possession. I think when we look at that, that really would just be a handful of people. We did a massive reform several years ago of reforming the system so that people like that would stay out of jail. What happens is that you commit serious offenses and then your plea bargain down to simple possession. For those that are in a federal penitentiary for smoking a marijuana cigarette, they need to be let out. Their records expunged. On the other hand, if you're in jail for possession of marijuana and you committed a serious crime, then you need to stay in there.
Mr. Cates.
Yes, sir. I agree that any person incarcerated, over half of the people incarcerated in the U.S., it's for a simple drug possession. They need to be released if they haven't committed a violent crime or a crime with a victim. The war on drugs it's a failure. It's over 100 years old. If we have to look at policy and figure out if it's effective or not, and the results is how we do that. Okay, and if we look at the war on drugs, the results it's only gotten worse. And marijuana, it's not even considered an unhealthy drug. We need to look at 90% of drug use is what the UN Drug Office calls non-problematic. You don't get addicted. You don't have any health issues, 90%. And marijuana is not even on that, all right? It's 10%, and those are opiate overdoses. And even opiates need to be not criminalized, but treated as a medical condition. And we can do this without compromising the safety of the American people.
To Ms. James.
I agree with what the administration is doing. It's important and a step in the right direction to decriminalize on a state level and also on a federal level to continue to help out and add to our economy and add citizens back to our working class and our workforce so that we can have a more productive, robust America, a robust Arkansas, and just so that we can, again, compete on a global market. Right now, we're trying to keep up with everybody else, and it's important that we have all Americans available to do that. And if they want to go in and serve into the military, they have the opportunity to do that and not let an indiscretion such as a simple charge that's being released hinder them from serving their country or getting a job or providing back. And that helps alleviate crime, helps alleviate poverty, and it helps bring in 2 household incomes so there are more people to be able to get married. So it's important, and I'm glad to see that we're having this step in the right direction, and I hope the state continues to follow.
We go back to Mr. Boozman for another 30 seconds.
Well, I agree. If you're in a federal penitentiary, and only 2% of the criminals that are incarcerated are in federal penitentiaries. So if you're there and you've smoked a marijuana joint and you got picked up, they need to let you out. I don't think there's very many of those. I think that this is part of the president sitting around in the Oval Office and trying to deflect from the economy, from inflation, and from the border. If you want to do something about drugs, we need to control the border. 70,000 Americans died of fentanyl overdose this last year.
To Mr. Cates, 30 seconds.
Not only control the border, but most of the stuff that's used to make fentanyl is coming from China. We need to address that as well.
Ms. James, 30 seconds if you wish.
I agree. We do need to address protecting our actual ports and those borders because that's where majority of actual drugs that are being brought in. We do need to talk about inflation and we do need to talk about all the other wonderful things, but this is an important step to actually help people right now in real time that's so needed in these times. We're still in a global pandemic. We've lost a lot of lives, a lot of family, and we have the opportunity to actually heal some families and bring people back together, which is rightly so, and what we should be focusing on and what our bipartisan efforts should be doing.
Education outcomes in the United States have for decades, I suppose, as measured against other countries, have achievement levels against other students in other countries have been disappointing. Post-pandemic, they have been especially disappointing. Mr. Cates first. What role do you see the federal government playing, if any, and what should be the extent now of federal assistance to states in terms of education, K-12?
I think we need to decentralize education and get the federal government out of it, sir. Currently, the U.S. students in reading, math, and English rank 20th, 30th, and 40th in the world. All right, we should be in the top 3. That's, this is the greatest country in the world. And the government keeps getting in the way of that. They tell the states, the teachers, the parents, how to teach, what to teach, and they just need to get out of the way.
Ms. James.
I feel that the federal government is needed to better maintain our school systems, especially locally where we might not have all the full provisions that are needed and resources. We saw in Little Rock School District where the state took over and we had 9 failing schools. Now, once the state gave it back, we had 22 failing schools. So saying that we don't need the federal to come in and better help with the state, I don't agree with that. My mother was an educator. I'm a daughter of a minister and a small business owner. And my mother told me something very important. When somebody shows you who they are the first time, you need to believe them. And right now we're hearing some very polished answers from a career politician, my opponent, John Boozman. And right now, I'm not up here to give you pretty words or sell you pretty words. I'm here to make sure you know you have an option and you have a choice on who's going to better represent you, your education, your future, and your family. And when we talk about not having the federal provisions needed for our education and our future, how are we going to advance ourselves with agriculture? How are we going to advance ourselves with military? How are we going to advance ourselves with anything if we don't have a proper education system for our most vulnerable?
We go now to Mr. Boozman.
Thank you, Steve. Education is right at the very top. I was on the school board for 7 years and very proud to serve in that capacity. There is all kinds of room for the federal government helping out, and they are helping out. Education is primarily a state function, but again, lots of help from the federal government. One of the things I'm very excited about is their help with the vocational programs. Shop class is not like it was when I was in school. now teaming with our vocational colleges. You can go to school, you can, at the end of the 11th grade, you can be a phlebotomist and have the certificate. By the time that you graduate from high school, you can be an LPN. By the time the first year after that, you can be a registered nurse and again, make a very, very good wage. This is the key. In order for Arkansas to move forward, we've got to have the workforce that we need. We've got to have a skilled workforce. Those are the jobs that we want, and this is the way to do it.
To Mr. Cates for 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. And I do agree that vocation is a great thing. That's something the states can do. The states have enough money. And again, if we want to look at the effectiveness of a policy, we have to look at the results. The federal government's been involved in education for a long time, and the results speak for themselves, right? Again, 20th, 30th, 40th place in math, reading, and science compared to the rest of the world. So the federal government's been involved, and we see the results. Thank you.
Ms. James.
Policy from the federal government is supposed to be preventative and impactful for all citizens and all constituents. It shouldn't be reactive. And what we're seeing on a state level is a very reactive policy against our actual education system. We need to make sure that we have the federal protections in place so that we do have the correct policies that are going to grow us further. Again, I can't keep saying it, but I am going to keep saying it. A 21st century education to compete in the global market is so important and critical for Arkansas, ranked 43 in education.
And to Mr. Boozman.
Thank you, Steve. I'm a real proponent of the regional concept, and again, the federal government has helped with that. You can't do these things by yourself. What you're seeing is schools going together, counties going together, and it really is make a difference. I agree, we need to have metrics, we need to have outcome, we need to hold people responsible. That's why I like it so much that these programs, you're not just going to class and studying, you're actually working towards a certificate so that once you get through with school, you can make a living wage.
Ms. Lee now, first to Mr. Boozman.
Yeah, Senator Boozman, we are seeing rapid growth, especially in Northwest Arkansas, where our station is. Companies like Walmart building a new headquarters, Tyson requiring all headquarter employees now to move to Arkansas to work out of their Springdale office. J.B. Hunt, one of the latest to reconsider growth in our area. What is the federal government's role in our infrastructure plan? How do we deal with the growth?
Well, infrastructure is so very important, and that's one of those issues that's not generally a partisan issue. I'm on the Environment and Public Works Committee. I had the opportunity to serve on the Transportation Committee in the House. That's the road building. I've been involved, I think, with everyone except for this last one, when you conference it in committee. So I'm committed to that. That's how you move forward. We used to think in terms of roads, railroads, runways, water. That's how an area developed. But now you certainly have to have broadband. So the other thing that we have to do, and I mentioned the importance of working together. That's one thing that the regional aspect of Northwest Arkansas does a very good job through the Northwest Council. So it's not only Northwest Arkansas, it's Central Arkansas, the Jonesboro region. We have some hot spots that are very important to take care of.
Mr. Cates, you have 1 minute.
Yes, sir. In regards to the federal government and providing money for infrastructure, they just passed an infrastructure bill and hardly any of it's going to infrastructure. Also, if we want the government to take care of our infrastructure, let's look at how they take care of theirs. They have 77,000 buildings that are not used or underused that cost $1.7 billion of taxpayer money each year. So do we really want them taking care of our infrastructure?
Ms. James, 1 minute.
I'm so glad to see reallocation. I'm glad to see people relocate and Tyson mandating people to relocate. And I'm glad that we do have the infrastructure bill that was put in place, no thanks to our current senator. And I'm grateful to see it. What we're also seeing is we have a senator who voted against the infrastructure bill, but is quick to show up when it's time for a ribbon cutting for a marina, but not for the actual roads and railways. And when I heard him speak, I didn't hear him say anything about the Delta or South Arkansas. And that's an important part of the state. That's over 450,000 citizens that are quite frankly, fly over country, I guess, to our senator. So we need to make sure that we have somebody that's going to utilize all of the infrastructure and use it in a bipartisan way to continue to grow Arkansas the way that Arkansas deserves to grow. And quite frankly, in the last 20 years, we have not had that opportunity. We've been last in everything that I've seen for the last 20 years since I was in high school. And it's time for us to change, and it's time for us to grow together and be inclusive of the whole state in all regions, including the South.
Mr. Boozman, another 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Steve. Again, I've been very, very involved in infrastructure and feel like it's so very important. It's interesting, I didn't vote for the last infrastructure bill. The reason I didn't vote for it is I'm on the Environment and Public Works, the committee that put together the roads and railroads and runways and that aspect of it. We allocated more money than had ever been spent before, came out of committee 19-0. The Democrats then stuck $300 billion of wasteful spending on it that had nothing to do with infrastructure. That's why I voted no.
We go back to Mr. Cates.
Yes, sir. Again, if we want to look at how the government handles infrastructure, look at how they handle their own. They just passed an infrastructure bill, and the majority of it doesn't go to infrastructure at all. $370 billion to climate change, $25 million to non-bias or implicit bias, training. So again, if we want to look at how they handled it, how they handle infrastructure, look at how they handle their own.
To Ms. James.
Voting against something and not providing any type of solution is not what Arkansas needs and deserves. I'm going to repeat again. 2 decades, 3 bills passed, a post office for Harrison, Arkansas, but you vote against infrastructure and do not provide any solutions to better help all of Arkansas. You mentioned Northwest Arkansas, Jonesboro, and Central Arkansas. But again, forget and negate the South. When they need that critical infrastructure, you voted against it. So we need to make sure we have somebody that's going to vote again for all of Arkansas.
Christina Munoz, question.
Yes, let's talk about the healthcare industry. So many hospitals in Arkansas, especially rural Arkansas, only survived the pandemic because of federal assistance. They are now again struggling. Do we need more federal assistance, or is it a game of if they fail, but especially in rural Arkansas, that's a huge concern. Mr. Cates, to you first.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Both parties always argue how to fund the healthcare system, instead of how to fix it. The problem with the healthcare system is the billing. All the prices are hidden, which there's no free market competition. If you have a heart attack, say in South Arkansas, it could cost $25,000. If you have a heart attack in North Arkansas, it could cost $400,000. They keep the prices hidden. They charge outrageous markups. One study, it showed that 23 times, marked up the original or Medicare allowable price. We need to make healthcare billing open and inspire that free market competition. Thank you.
Ms. James.
You are correct, we do. And we have something, and we had a provision, a bipartisan act that actually put in place to better help alleviate all of those questions, and it was the Affordable Cares Act. Well, it was broken apart in a way that shouldn't have been broken apart and didn't help all of Arkansas and all Americans. Now, you are correct, we do see a lot of hospital deserts all across the state, and it's important that we have the actual hospitals being taken care of, and federally, it is a lot more that we could be doing to keep a lot of them open so that people aren't, again, having to drive hundreds of miles, people aren't having to be flown in, and people aren't having to decide, do I want to take my medicine now and divvy it up until I get to my doctor's appointment, and deciding, do I want to have this drive, spend another gas tank full of gas to drive to Little Rock when I live again in South Arkansas, and Arkansas, and I don't have the resources available to us, especially with our veterans. We need to make sure that everything is totally taken care of with all hospitals across the state, and that should be first and foremost.
And to Mr. Boozman for 1 minute.
Thank you. Again, rural hospitals are so important. If you don't have a rural hospital, you lose it. You lose it in your county, you lose it in your community, you lose your doctors. Pretty soon you lose your community. That's the first thing that people look at as they decide where to settle is, what are the amenities in play? What are the schools like? That's why schools are so important. Again, what's the healthcare situation look like? There's a number of federal programs that are helping rural hospitals. Hospitals, even though we had the pandemic, many of them they weren't able to do elective surgeries and things like that. That's kind of their bread and butter. It's amazing they were really slammed during the pandemic, although lots of people were sick. So I'm committed to continuing those programs as we go forward, recognizing the importance of the rural hospital system.
We return to Mr. Cates for 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. The Affordable Care Act was mentioned. The Affordable Care Act was written by the same companies that want to keep the prices hidden. Thank you.
Ms. James?
We're hearing where we're talking about hospitals and making sure that everybody has a doctor, but we're also hearing where we have a federal abortion ban that's being put in place, a national abortion ban that our party, another party doesn't want for the rest of everybody. We need to make sure that we are protecting our hospitals the same way we are protecting our doctors, and make sure our doctors can make adequate decisions to protect all citizens within those said hospitals. Because we can open up plenty of them, but if we're not allowing our doctors to actually take care of our patients in the full capacity for full health care, then we're doing them a disservice.
Got to go to Mr. Boozman now for 30 seconds.
Again, helping hospitals with new designs, partnering with bigger hospitals and bigger communities. Those are things. Telemedicine has been a big boom for rural medicine. So these are things that we can work on, again, realizing the importance as we go forward, protecting our rural communities.
We are going to pause for just a moment to let you know, or remind you actually, that the candidates are free to participate in a press conference individually directly following the debate. To watch that live from your home or wherever, you scan your QR code on your screen. There it is from with your mobile device, and you will see that QR code periodically through the balance of our debate. Fresh question now, and it goes first to Ms. James. Hardly any other issue, certainly in Arkansas, is driving the political debate this season than crime. What do you see as the federal government's role vis-a-vis cities and states in addressing the problem?
Addressing the problem first means actually thinking about a solution for it. We haven't heard solutions from the other side as to how we can help alleviate crime. Well, the solution is simple. Make sure we pay people a fair and adequate wage. Make sure that they have the health care there available for them. Make sure that they have the provided and needed resources for education. Because when you aren't making enough money, you make stress decisions, and sometimes you make poor decisions. We have 9 private prisons in Arkansas, and that's too many. We don't have a recidivism program that incorporates getting people back on and back into the actual socialization and population of Arkansas. And that's another aspect that we should be focusing on, because a lot of this crime is from repeat offenders, because we're not training and coaching and motivating them to be citizens. We are motivating them to continue to be career criminals, and we shouldn't be doing that.
Senator Boozman, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. This again, is a question that we've got to deal with. Arkansas, the nation, has experienced significant crime. You pick up a newspaper and you read that in Little Rock, we're one of the top 20, top 30, usually top 20 most violent crimes per capita. Well, that's not just Little Rock, that's Arkansas when people see that, when they're trying to decide where they want to settle. So there's a big place for the federal government to be helpful. I'm on the subcommittee that controls funding for various programs like this. The Burn Jag program, which is a program that gives policemen and gives law enforcement the tools that they need to keep themselves safe, to keep us safe. These are the kind of programs that we need to support as we go forward.
Mr. Cates?
Yes, sir. We fight crime by not demonizing the guys who fight it. Currently, most police departments, they're experiencing significant turnover. A friend of mine is in law enforcement, and he's down 3 guys just on his shift alone because we've demonized the guys who fight it. Thank you.
James.
Right now, holding somebody accountable is not demonizing them. Holding people accountable for their actions, just as I hope that all of Arkansas will hold me accountable when I am your future senator, is something that's needed on all fronts, regardless of who it is that you are. Now, we do need to address the mental health crisis and make sure that we have the mental health workers and make sure that we're addressing the major issues that are contributing factors to crime and to poverty. And if we can address those issues in a more sound way, we can alleviate a lot of that actual stress that law enforcement is receiving.
Mr. Boozman, you have another 30 seconds.
I've had the opportunity to visit with all of the federal law enforcement agencies in the state, asking them what they need to do a better job helping local law enforcement. There's a lot of task force that go on, and again, making sure that they've got what they need. The other thing that we did, myself and Senator Cotton, under the Trump administration, we put 2 prosecutors in place that did a very, very good job fighting crime and again, helping the local police.
Mr. Gates.
Yes, sir. I agree holding individual officers accountable and to a high standard. We give them a lot of authority and responsibility, but we shouldn't demonize the whole industry and all of them, all right? We should just hold the one accountable and support the rest. Thank you.
Ms. Lee has a question first for Mr. Cates.
All right, Mr. Cates, let's talk about immigration. Many people across the political spectrum say that our immigration system is broken and in crisis. How do you think the current administration is handling immigration? If you had a moment with the president, how would you counsel the president to reform our immigration system?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Lee. Well, they're not handling it, obviously. Thousands of illegal aliens come across the border every day. And I want those people, to have a better life, just like I'm sure we all are. But we're a nation of borders. We're a sovereign nation. That's what makes it, is our borders. And we need to secure it, and we need to focus on immigration reform, such as work visas, so these people can come in and make a better life for their family. Thank you.
Ms. James?
We're a nation of immigrants, and we can't forget that. We did not originate here in America. We came over seeking shelter from religious persecution and from taxes. So we can't sit here and call them illegal immigrants. We need to call them what they are. They are refugees seeking asylum, seeking help, because that's the same thing that we did when we first came over here, and the same rights should be allotted to anybody else that wants to come over here and be a citizen and be a productive citizen. Now, I do agree, we do need to cut a lot of the red tape. There's too much red tape that's hindering the actual asylum process, the refugee process, or any of the immigration process. Right now, we need to make sure we're doing what's best and what's humane for everyone involved in all parties, even if it means hiring more people to make sure that they're able to adequately process and get everybody in and bring people to a safe way of life.
Over to Mr. Boozman.
We need to secure the border. If you don't secure the border, it doesn't matter what immigration system you put in, then it won't work because people will continue to flood across. And it is a flood. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a national security crisis. 80 people in this last year were apprehended on the border that were on the terrorist watch list. 3.5 million people were caught since Biden has taken control. 500,000 they know crossed the border, but they weren't able to be apprehended. You think about it, we're a state that has a little over 3 million people. You've got the state of Arkansas coming in the last 2 years, and everybody feels like it'll be even greater unless we do something, plus 1 million people. What do you do with these folks? Where do you do them? Some have been sent to New York, a few thousand, the sanctuary city. They've gone crazy, tried to trawl out the National Guard, won $1 billion. This is a national crisis and a national security issue.
Sir, Mr. Cates, 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. We are a nation of immigrants, but those immigrants came in legally. They had to register on Ellis Island, and my immediate family is immigrants, or immigrated to the U.S., and we did it the right way, the legal way. Thank you.
Ms. James?
Right now, what we're seeing, we do have, when we talk about immigration again, and we talk about securing our border, 3 million people were stopped. That sounds really secure to me. Drugs were stopped. That sounds like what we have in place is working. Now, stopping actual individuals, whether it's 3 million people coming over here to seek asylum, guess what? America is large. Most of America could fit in Alaska, the size of Alaska, and still have an acre of their own. So we have plenty of space to put them here. We want to be productive citizens, allow them the opportunity to do that. And if they don't, then that's what the immigration process is for, to continue to have those that are here that are going to be productive.
Mr. Boozman, 30 seconds.
Well, we are a nation of immigrants. We've got 5 million people in line doing it the right way. Most of them, it will take up to 10 years to get their naturalization. We naturalize 1 million people a year, more almost than the rest of the world put together. We can be very proud of that. We're a nation of laws. We can't have hundreds of thousands, literally, millions of people crossing the border in an unlawful way.
Ms. Munoz, question first for Ms. James.
Yes, talking about higher education, the cost of college, the rising cost of college is making it almost unattainable for many Arkansans. So whether or not you agree with the student loan debt relief plan that is still being argued over, what would you do to help struggling Arkansans pay for higher education? Ms. James first.
Well, I'm a mom of a 17-year-old getting ready to face that. So making sure she has the education she needs, any supplemental education so that she can have scholarships, and explaining that you don't have to leave home, you can still go here, and there are different types of vocational trades and other options available. We push college, but college might not be for everybody. We need to make sure that we're pushing all options that are for our children, because not every kid's the same, and we want to make sure that we're recognizing that. Now, with the student loan forgiveness, I think it's a step in the right direction, because it helps those in South Arkansas. It helps those all in Arkansas, especially those communities of color. It helps those communities that are often left behind by career politicians with wonderful, shiny answers, but not real solutions. So I'm glad to see that we have an actual solution put in place and not another trope or fear-mongering trope when we talk about inflation or borders or anything else. It's time to stop with the fear, and it's time for us to actually advocate for our future and advocate for all constituents.
Mr. Boozman.
Well, I'm opposed to the Biden plan of forgiveness. The reason being it's not fair. Why is it fair if you just paid off your student loans before March of 2020, and then if you just took a student loan out after that, you get your loan forgiven on one end and the other not? Why is it fair that a family of making $250,000 gets loan forgiveness of $20,000 when you've got a hardworking family making $35,000, $50,000, $70,000, whatever? Nobody's paying off their debts. So for that reason, I'm very much opposed. What we've got to do is get the university system under control, in the sense that their inflation rate has been tremendously greater than the normal inflation rate.
Mr. Cates.
Yes, sir. I agree that vocational should be another option, and that the prices of college is out of control, like healthcare as well. But remember, student loan forgiveness, the federal government paying for someone's student loan, is not free. Somebody has to pay for it. The taxpayer does. So you're just transferring debt from one person to another.
Ms. James?
We're going to talk about forgiving loans. We need to talk about PPP loans that were forgiven to numerous colleagues and co-workers of our divested Senator John Boozman from his company. We have seen 10 articles talking about having easeability and feasibility for these corporations, but we have not and have yet to see about easeability in 10 articles for actual student loans or relief for citizens of Arkansas, or those citizens and students wanting to go to school. And I think that's something important and indicative of a future senator to have, to make sure that they're thinking about everybody, not just the corporate colleagues and co-workers, and making sure their PPP loans in the amounts of millions of dollars are forgiven versus 10,000.
To Mr. Boozman.
Well, again, we need to Pell Grants, scholarships, and certainly there's a place for that in the federal government. You need to get your act straight in the sense of when you accuse people of things. I have not received any PPP loans. I don't know where that's coming from. My brother and I started a clinic many, many years ago. I worked there 24 years. I've not been associated with it for 2 decades. So, like I say, I don't know who is feeding your facts, but they're totally false. And Right's right and wrong's wrong.
I said divested. You are divested, correct?
I haven't worked there in 20 years.
That is right. You're divested from it. I said your colleagues
Save
and
it.
your corporations.
Save it for closing
Not you.
statements if we can. Because
I've
I have
worked-
to be.
I
I have to
didn't
be
mention
fair to
I've
Mr.
worked
Senator.
in
I have to be
several
fair to
places
Mr.
throughout
Cates.
the years.
I mentioned your articles, not you.
So-
And I said you're divested, correct?
Mr. Cates is up.
No rebuttal, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I have his time?
Closing statements. Now, time for closing statements. And as determined prior to the broadcast, Mr. Cates, you're first. You have 1 minute, sir.
Yes, sir. If you feel like there's something wrong in D.C., it's because there is. Congress has a current approval rating that's almost in the single digits. Both parties answer to big corporations and the woke mob. We need leaders who put people first, not profit or politics. Thank you.
Mr. Boozman, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. We've got the senior broadcaster in Arkansas, the guy that is kind of the dean of broadcasting. We've got Ms. Lee, Ms. Munoz, the future deans of broadcasting here. So we appreciate your hard work and appreciate public broadcasting. As I go around the state, the primary thing I hear about, in fact, I've always said, if you can't make a living, if you can't take care of your family, everything else is pretty unimportant. The thing that's killing Americans right now is inflation. 8.2%, we've had over 8.2% inflation for the last 7 months. Remember, this was going to be transitory. So we're in a situation now where we simply have to do something about that. And so I believe that if we lift our eyes above and get to work here, working together, we'll be able to solve that problem. We've got a lot of other problems that we can solve working together, and America
Senator,
will continue to be the greatest, freest country.
Got to call time, Senator.
Anywhere.
I apologize.
Thank you.
Ms. James, you have 1 minute.
Call inflation what it is. Inflation is corporate greed. And as I said before, we've seen numerous corporations and colleagues of our current incumbent receive millions of dollars worth of PPP loans to be forgiven, and yet they continue to have 50-year profits, higher than we've ever seen. And yes, we do have 8.8% inflation right now, but it's forecasted to go down because of what the current administration is doing. It's forecasted to go down to 5.3%. Enough with the tropes, enough with the fear, enough with the wolf in sheep's clothing, enough with the political 20-year polished, very polished, rehearsed responses. They tell you exactly what they want you to hear, and then they go back to Washington and vote against your best interests. Arkansas, you have a choice. You have a choice right now to make sure you have somebody that's going to vote for veterans, our families, our working class, and make sure that everybody is taken care of. And I'm Natalie James, and I'm asking you for your vote today and for you to check out my issues and our platform at jamesforarkansas.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
And with that, we thank our 3 candidates for appearing on our broadcast. And to our viewers, you can watch this and all the Arkansas PBS debates on demand at the Arkansas PBS YouTube channel, on the PBS video app, and on our website.